My name is Clara Whitmore. I am 34 years old. And I want to tell you about a letter. Not a long letter. 3 pages, handwritten, in my grandmother's careful script that had gotten slightly shakier in her last year but was still entirely her, precise, direct, with the specific economy of someone who had spent 91 years learning exactly what needed to be said and what did not. She had written it 8 months before she died. She had sealed it in an envelope with my name on the front and given it to her lawyer with instructions that it be delivered to me privately, not at the reading of the will, not in front of the family, but separately, in a meeting with just me and the lawyer, 7 days after her funeral. I did not know the letter existed until that meeting. My sister Diane did not know the letter existed at all. What my grandmother had written in those 3 pages, what she had known for 30 years and had chosen to put down in her own handwriting and seal and give to her lawyer 8 months before she died, is the thing that changed everything. For my sister. For my family. For the story we had all been living inside without knowing it was a story at all. If you are new here, please subscribe right now and drop your country and local time in the comments. I read every single one. Now let me take you back to where this started. My grandmother's name was Eleanor Whitmore. She had been born in 1932 in a small town in Georgia and had lived through things that people of her generation lived through: the Depression, the war, the specific experience of being a woman in mid-century America who had intelligence and ambition and very limited authorized outlets for either. She had married my grandfather at 22. He died at 64, leaving her 30 years of widowhood that she navigated with the same precision she brought to everything. She had 2 children, my father Robert and his younger sister Patricia. She had 4 grandchildren, my brother James, my sister Diane, me, and Patricia's son William. She was the kind of grandmother who saw each grandchild clearly and specifically. Not the vague, universal warmth of someone who loves grandchildren as a category. The particular warmth of someone who has taken the time to understand who each person actually is. She and I were close in a way that was different from her closeness with the others. Not more loved, I want to be careful about that. But differently connected. We read the same books. We had the same sense of humor, dry and precise, that occasionally made other family members look at us blankly while we tried not to laugh. We talked about real things in the way that is rare between generations and precious when you find it. I think she knew, from the time I was quite young, that I was the one she could trust with what she knew. I think that is why she wrote the letter to me. To understand the letter, I need to tell you about Diane. Diane is 2 years older than me. She is the kind of person who moves through the world with the specific confidence of someone who has always known exactly where she stands in every room she enters. Not arrogance, confidence. There is a difference. Arrogance assumes you are better than the room. Confidence simply operates as though the room is yours. Diane had built a life that our family held up, consciously or not, as the template. She had married well. Her husband Gregory came from a prominent family in our state, old money, connected in the specific ways that open doors which are otherwise locked. She had 2 beautiful children. She sat on the boards of 2 nonprofits. She was involved in our community in visible and significant ways. And she was the keeper of the family story. Not officially. Not by appointment. But by temperament and by proximity. She had stayed in Georgia while James and I had moved away, which meant she was the one who was present at every family gathering, every holiday, every Sunday dinner at our grandmother's house. She was the one who organized things and remembered things and told things. The family story she told was a particular one. It was the story of the Whitmore family as a family of standing. Of integrity. Of the specific unbroken quality of people who had kept their name clean across several generations and understood what that meant and what it required. Diane believed this story completely. She had built her identity around it. Her marriage, her community involvement, her public presentation of herself, all of it was rooted in the narrative of who the Whitmores were. The letter my grandmother wrote was about something that story had never included. My grandmother's lawyer was a woman named Margaret Ellis who had handled Eleanor's affairs for 22 years. She called me 11 days after the funeral and asked me to come to her office. She said it was about a private communication from my grandmother that had been left in her care. I went on a Thursday afternoon. Margaret gave me tea. She handed me the envelope with my name on it in my grandmother's handwriting. She said she would give me privacy to read it and that she would be available afterward to answer any questions she could. I opened the envelope. I read the letter 3 times before I fully understood what it was saying. My grandmother had written, in her careful, precise hand, about something that had happened 31 years earlier. My father Robert and his sister Patricia had each inherited a portion of my grandfather's estate when he died. The estate included, among other things, a piece of land, 40 acres in a rural county in Georgia that my grandfather had purchased in the 1960s and that had sat largely unused for 30 years, its value quietly increasing as the region developed around it. The land was to be divided equally between Robert and Patricia according to my grandfather's will. 50% each. What my grandmother had discovered, 3 years after my grandfather's death, was that the division had not been equal. Diane, who had been working at the law firm handling the estate at the time as a junior associate, her first position out of law school, had been involved in the paperwork. The documents had been prepared incorrectly. Or rather, and this was what my grandmother had spent 3 years quietly investigating before she was certain, the documents had been prepared in a way that was not quite incorrect but was not quite right either. A reclassification of a portion of the land that shifted the effective split from 50-50 to something closer to 60-40. A reclassification that had required a specific legal judgment call that a junior associate should not have been making independently. A judgment call that had benefited my father's share. My grandmother had confronted my father about it. Privately. He had been, she wrote, genuinely distressed. He had not known. The discrepancy had been handled below his level of involvement and he had signed documents he had not reviewed with sufficient care. But he had known after Eleanor confronted him. And he had not corrected it. Patricia had never been told. She had accepted her share of the estate and moved on with her life, never knowing that what she had received was smaller than what her father had intended for her. Diane had never acknowledged what the documents had done. And my grandmother had held this for 30 years. She had held it because correcting it would have required dismantling things. Patricia's life had been built on her portion of the estate. My father's life had been built on his. The family structure had absorbed the discrepancy and grown around it the way a tree grows around a wire. But she had not been willing to die without putting it down on paper. She had written it to me, she said this explicitly in the letter, because she trusted me to understand that the truth does not have an expiration date. That what she was giving me was not an instruction. It was information. What I did with it was my choice and she trusted my judgment. She trusted it, she wrote, because I was the only one of her grandchildren who had never needed the family story to be perfect in order to feel secure inside it. I sat in Margaret's office for a long time after reading the letter. Then I asked Margaret what she knew. She knew the contents, she had witnessed the letter's signing and understood what it contained. She told me that the land in question had been sold 12 years ago and the proceeds had been distributed through my father's estate after his death 4 years earlier. Patricia's portion of those proceeds, the corrected portion she should have received, was calculable. It was a significant amount. I asked if there was a legal obligation involved. Margaret said that was a question for a different kind of lawyer. What she could tell me was that my grandmother had chosen to give me this information privately and that whatever I decided to do with it was entirely my decision. I drove home. I sat in my apartment for 3 days. On the 4th day I called my Aunt Patricia. I want to be careful about how I describe this part of the story because Patricia is a person I love and what I had to tell her was information that rearranged 30 years of her understanding of her own life. I drove to her house. I sat across from her at her kitchen table. I told her I had received a letter from Grandma Eleanor and that it contained something she needed to know. I read her the relevant portions of the letter. Patricia is not a dramatic person. She sat with what I read her for a long time without speaking. Then she said, Eleanor knew. For 30 years, I said. Another long silence. Did Robert know? After the fact, I said. According to Grandma. And Diane. It was not a question. Yes, I said. Patricia looked at her hands for a long moment. Then she looked at me. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Not accusingly. Genuinely. Because Grandma trusted me to give you the choice she did not feel she could give you herself, I said. What you do with it is yours. What Patricia did was this. She did not go to the police. She did not file a lawsuit. She was 63 years old and her life was built, and she had no interest in spending the years she had left in litigation. What she did was call Diane. I was not on that call. Patricia told me about it afterward, in the measured way she told most things, precisely, without embellishment, letting the facts carry the weight. She told Diane what she knew. She told Diane that she had documentation. She told Diane that she was not pursuing legal action. And then she told Diane what she wanted. Not money. Not apology. Not acknowledgement in front of the family. She wanted Diane to step down from the board of one of the nonprofits she sat on, the one that Patricia had helped found 20 years earlier and that Diane had joined 5 years ago, in a move that Patricia had always found difficult to articulate her discomfort with. She wanted her organization back. Diane resigned from the board 3 weeks later. The announcement was quiet. A simple statement about shifting priorities. My relationship with Diane after that was not what it had been before. We are family. We see each other at the gatherings that family requires. We are civil and appropriate and careful in the way of people who know something real about each other that cannot be unknown. She has never spoken to me directly about the letter. She knows I have it. She knows what I did with it. She has chosen not to address it, and I have chosen not to force the address. That is its own kind of accounting. Patricia and I are closer now than we have ever been. She came to stay with me for a week last spring. We talked about Eleanor every evening, about who she was and what she had carried and why she had chosen to put it down on paper 8 months before she died. Patricia said something on the last evening that I think about often. She said, Eleanor knew she could not fix what had been done. But she did not want to be the last one holding it. She needed someone else to hold it with her. Even after she was gone. I said, I think she also needed you to know. Not for the money. Because your father meant you to have it, and she needed you to know that he had meant it. Patricia was quiet for a long time. Then she said, that is the part that helps. Not what was taken. That he meant it for me. My grandmother died in February 3 years ago. I still miss her with the specific grief of someone who has lost a person they could talk to about real things. I think about her letter often. About the decision she made 8 months before she died to put those 3 pages in an envelope and give them to her lawyer. About what it cost her to carry what she knew for 30 years and what it meant to her to set it down. She trusted me with the hardest thing she knew. I try to be worthy of that trust every day. Not by making everything right, some things cannot be made entirely right. But by understanding that the truth does not have an expiration date. That the stories we are living inside deserve to be complete ones. That the people we love deserve to know the things that were meant for them, even when the knowing is hard. My grandmother knew that. She spent 91 years knowing it. And in the end, in 3 pages of her careful handwriting, she made sure someone else would know it too. Before you go, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been the person someone trusted with something they could not carry alone? Have you ever received information that rearranged your understanding of a story you thought you knew? And have you ever had to decide what to do with a truth that was not yours to keep but was also not yours to destroy? Drop the word letter in the comments if this story reached something real in you. And if you are new here, subscribe. Every single day I share a new story about family, about truth, and about the things that get written down when there is no other way to say them. I will see you in the next one. Kayla's Dark Truth.